For me, the number one thing in my business was about people. It wasn't about profits. I've always had two passions in my life, and it's interesting that they've remained consistent my entire life. One is music, and the other is sports. Understanding all the competitors that we're working with. So when you go into a sales environment, you want to know how to position yourself. I think he paid her like $600 for this logo that ends up becoming a driving visual force for one of the world's most valued and admired brands.
Today's episode is sponsored by In Touch, the simplest way to strengthen your relationships. You can't buy relationships, but with In Touch, you can invest in them. Download In Touch from the App Store or click the link in our description.
The world is moving faster than it ever has before. Both challenges and opportunities flood our days with cortisol and dopamine. As the world around us changes, the core of our humanity remains constant. Minnesota business serves to tell stories, share ideas, and form community. Let's get to it. Mark Morse, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Danny. Great to be here.
I've driven by this building so many times, always seen the guitar pick on the outside, and always wondered, what was that? What do they do? Who runs that place? And here I am talking to the owner. It's actually a surreal moment. So,
well, that's great. I'm glad to hear the pick did its job of creating a little wonder and mystery, and happy to have you here to answer any questions.
What's the story behind the pick?
Well, I come from a music history, and as I was getting the business off the ground, I was trying to find the right way to see if there's any value in promoting the business around a music idea. And I was conversing with a grizzled old mentor of mine and asking him questions like, well, why would a CEO of a major corporation care if I build an agency with kind of music in the DNA? And he looks at me and he goes, well, what's the one word that people use to describe music or musicians? And I had a bunch of words in my mind, but he goes, creativity. So at that moment, I decided, okay, that's a word that I'd love associated with the business, obviously. So let's find a way to make it work. And then the way that we made it work is creating this analogy between great brands and great songs. Both communicate a story or a message or an experience for a very specific audience in an intentional style that connects to that audience on an emotional level. So I built out this brand platform called Brand Groove. So we exist then to help brands find this emotional connection within their audience. And when you connect to an audience on an emotive level, you have them from a trust perspective, from a loyalty perspective, and that trust can cover a multitude of product or brand sins over the years. So we really stumbled into this and intentionally built a meaningful approach to creating our brand engagements. And then we practiced what we preached with the pick. So we designed something that's going to reflect who we are at our core and create emotional connection to our clients and our employees and our partners. So executing it through design, through experience, as you've experienced our office here, there's a lot of music threads. You just had a chance to play the theremin. Congratulations, your maiden voyage. And then even our identity has guitar pick in the business card. So you pop that out and it's just this tactile experience that
cool.
further substantiates our brand positioning.
Wow. Well, I want to back it up a little bit. So Morse code has been around for 20 plus years, recently had an exit or a merger. Mm-hmm. But before Morse code began, take me back to the origin story, kind of a young Mark. Have you always been creative? What was the path, or was there an inflection point that puts you on the creative path? Or, I guess I'm just gonna let you cook a little bit.
Sure. There's definitely a couple of inflection points. I've always had two passions in my life, and it's interesting that they've remained consistent my entire life. One is music, and the other is sports. And earlier in my life, I think sports took a little bit more front and center. It was a sad day when I realized I was not going to be the next Larry Bird. So when I realized that, there were some other opportunities that were presenting themselves in the music space. And there was a period of time where I was, my main instrument that I play is drums, and I was on the road with bands and doing sessions and playing and teaching and doing all these things to create a living as a drummer. The old joke, if you were a full-time musician, was, "Oh, you're a full-time drummer, huh? What restaurant do you work at?" But I had the good fortune of being plugged into a software company that had hired me to design some notation font for their music notation software, and they were using a design firm to brand their packages and their products. So my first exposure to creativity applied to business. My creative path has always been through music, writing and composing and trying to play things on an emotive level that will connect to that audience. So this was the first time where I saw components and elements of design, photography, textures, colors, tell a story. And I was all in. So at that moment, I took my music performance degree, and then I hopped into grad school to get a MBA in marketing, because I knew a grand total of zilch around business, and it was great to sharpen that sword and kind of feel this energetic conversion or collision more really around music, creativity, and business.
So it felt like that was the obvious path forward? Did it feel like you were giving up your musical dream of being a rock star or anything like that?
There was a little bit of that, but I was growing a little bit weary of the lifestyle. Just grinding. It's either feast or famine. At least for where I was at that phase in my career. I loved the playing, but I didn't care for the setup and the waiting and the tear down. And so there was good, bad, and otherwise about it. I oftentimes have said, sometimes you give up something you love for something you love even more. And at that phase in my career, no regrets around that shift, because I became really passionate about creativity more holistically than just music.
So what did you learn about harnessing creativity to help people and businesses make money? Was that a challenging mindset shift, or I guess that first job? What were some of the key lessons?
Yeah, I think I had the good fortune of being able to see in this Minneapolis community specifically. It's an amazing creative community, a lot of amazing agencies and film and music and art outlets. So having the strategic pipeline feeding half of my brain around MBA-like qualities of marketing strategy and differentiation, et cetera, and then seeing those come to life through the community of which I was starting to become a part of. I had an opportunity to become an intern at Fallon McGilligan. It's now called Fallon, but back in those days, years and years ago, it was the most creatively awarded shop in town. And right there that was one of those inflection moments where it's like, oh, wow, this is like grad school on steroids, because you see the best in class people coming to the table, a creative director, a strategist, a researcher, a business account director, all together to help figure out how to help the client use creativity and to differentiate their business or brand or product. And that differentiation then drives revenue or market share, which leads to revenue. So all that to say, I found the mix of creating uniqueness or distinction or differentiation around your business or your brand is what really gives you that accelerated opportunity to make revenue or to generate profit for the business.
How was that measured? So like when at Fallon, for example, you got all these experts that coming around to brainstorm and create a plan, and then say you execute it amazingly, but like, how do you measure the brand? Because a lot of this stuff, if it's not a pay-per-click or something with attribution, it's tough to prove it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think today we realize that the more integrated or the more channels that you're sending your messaging through, the more difficult it is to understand which channel is driving it to ultimately to this person to go into this store to buy this product. The general rule is to make sure you're aligning your metric or your measurement to the business objective. So if generating awareness around your product or your business is key, then there are certain awareness metrics you use, like share of voice or share of mindset or likability of a product or brand that generates word of mouth. Some of those kinds of metrics drive decisions and how to distribute or spend your marketing dollars. Nowadays, we can measure from awareness through purchase and post-purchase. So we have a really good understanding of what channels will work, but you're also you're kind of betting that you fully understand what part of a communication is it that moves somebody to that next best action. So, for example, if we shot a video and the story was right, the music was not, how many listeners or viewers are going to watch that video to the end if they don't like the music or it doesn't connect to the overall message or the brand style or that audience per se? So they'll abandon that video because of one creative execution within that overall piece. Those are some of the things that agencies can bring to the table or somebody with more experience can bring to the table, making sure you're matching the delivery of the tone or the story to the channel and to the audience.
So so it sounds like you learned a lot. Excuse me. Sounds like Fallon was kind of like boot camp, or that was where you learned a lot. Any favorite projects or anything that come to mind, or any I don't know, maybe hard lessons or mistakes, failures that you overcame early on in your career?
One of my favorite projects, actually, when I was at Fallon, I give that leadership team, Pat and that whole organization, so much credit because they broke down the expectation that ideas should only come from one or two places. So as an intern, I was brought into a project for Jim Beam, a brand that they had, a liqueur brand that they had. Jim Beam was going to launch a new product in Brazil, and they needed to come up with a name for the product. So they asked Fallon to come up with a name. And the product was going to be sold to high energy youth enthusiasts, socialites in Brazil. And that culture was high energy and exciting. And the product we knew was going to largely be used in nightclubs and bars and parties. So one of the names that I was able to create was called Loki, L-O-K-I, which in a Brazilian root meant a little bit crazy, kind of fun crazy. And the client actually selected that name to go forward with in testing. So that's an opportunity that you don't get very often, especially as an intern. You wouldn't have that opportunity unless an organization believed that creative happens. Those sparks fly from everywhere. And sometimes it's a one-off specialty that somebody came up with, and they may never come up with another idea again. But having your system and culture set up so you can absorb that and listen, I thought was really cool. That was a really momentous experience in my life, and drove a lot of confidence and understanding of, okay, I'm starting to get how all this stuff kind of works together.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly validating. I would like to go in on that for a second. I don't think you're Brazilian.
Nope.
Have you ever traveled to Brazil at that point?
I had never been there. And,
So how do you come up with that? What's your process?
and that's where you rely on the disciplines of an agency. And at that time, it was the account planning and insight group at Fallon, led by the incomparable Rob White. So they would gather insights and data and cull all of that down into a really smart, succinct brief. And if you have questions about, so in this brief, you talk about this part of their culture. What does this mean? You go back to them and you collaboratively converse around those insights to get to a core of a unique or better idea. So it was not a solo venture at all. And then you're throwing ideas around with some other people and you take those back and you work on some things and you're crossing out a bunch of options and you circle a few of them. And then eventually you present them to the rest of the team and the taller ones end up standing. And you circle one or two as the ones to take to a client and they will fall in love with one or two or none and go back through that process. And it definitely takes a village to build those cool creative moments.
So what was the inflection for starting Morse code then? At what point did you take that leap of faith and when did you know that you were ready?
Well, it's kind of a unique story. There was only one reason I ever would have left Fallon, and that was to work on a really hot brand that was also in town at a different agency. And that brand, I will be dating myself with this, but that brand was called Rollerblade and at Carmichael Lynch. And Carmichael was doing amazing award-winning work. That opportunity to go join that team presented itself, and I hopped on it. And about a year and a half after I made that move, Rollerblade decided to switch agencies for some strange reason. And I had been through my continual music connections. I was playing in some bands all along the way. And one of the guys in one of the bands I was playing with was connected to another gentleman who was at an agency. I met him. He was a writer. We decided to leave and start our own agency called Whitney Morse. And so I jumped ship and started Whitney Morse, largely based on some conversations we had with one of my former partners, Mr. Whitney, one of his former clients, who said that, okay, if you guys go jump ship and start your own agency, I'll give you our account when you set up shop. So we're like, oh, great. We're going to start with revenue right out of the gate. We did that about 2-3 weeks after we set up Whitney Morse. We learned that the CEO of this company had told our contact that we're not giving any business. We're going to take all the business in-house and try and not spend with agencies. So our plan was immediately shifted. So you learn how to grow business when you have no business. And I had fortunately been trained at some really amazing people like Mark Goldstein at Fallon around how to position and grow an agency and sell services. So we were able to survive that and partnered at Whitney Morse for about 6 years. And then I sold out of that for some creative differences. And
wait, I got to pause for a second.
yeah.
All right. I mean, how do you go and get new business? Would you do?
Yeah.
Because you don't have any track record. I guess you have your personal track record, but you have this agency.
Yeah. Here we are. And what do you do? Well, we haven't done anything together yet, but this is what we did at our former agencies. So in those instances, we would go into new client opportunities with homework. We've gone in, we've studied your market, we've looked at your brand, we think there's opportunities here. We can do this stuff, and here's how we would do it.
How do you even get those meetings? How do you know there's a client opportunity?
Man, a lot of it was nowadays it would be the equivalent of a LinkedIn introduction. So, hey, I've looked at your profile. There's some really cool similarities in what you either creatively or from a values perspective, or I've studied your brand and we have a really powerful idea on how to make it do X, Y, or Z, or to help solve this problem we think is a problem. And honestly, in today's day and age, it would be incredibly powerful to use solutions like ChatGPT to get things started and to help you assess and research and gather insights. And then you use your human qualities to assess which are the priorities and how to generate thought and idea around that. And then you can go to a business with some thoughtful solutions. And what I had found is oftentimes people want to listen to an idea you have for them, and they'll buy you, maybe not even for that idea. Sometimes it's just about the fact that you poured that passion and that energy into them or their business. You demonstrated that you know how to work, so you're relatively smart, at least initially, and then you can develop this sense of, oh, okay, so they're in it for me. It's not just for them. And we had become pretty good at understanding all the competitors that we're working with. So when you go into a sales environment, you want to know how to position yourself. So we were able to leverage our existing network. Some of my earlier clients were that software company I mentioned earlier. I went right back to them and said, maybe we can help you. I know you're going to launch this new product, and they agreed.
Nice.
So it's being a little aggressive. It's tapping into your network and coming to those engagements with some helpful information.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah.
I interrupted you. You're talking about, okay, so that went for a while. You had some success for 5 years.
Yep.
And then creative differences.
Yeah.
Yeah. How common is creative differences?
Oh man, it's the go-to description for when people in this industry kind of break apart. We had some creative differences. So it ended amicably. My former partner and I, we had gone through a .com phase where we launched a .com business during the heyday of our agency. So there was just all sorts of high energy chaos going on.
Yeah.
But I think I was burning out in that old model, and I was unable to move that business to the direction I wanted to. So I just hit the pause button. And after I had sold out of that, I was sitting around one afternoon, literally throwing a ball against a wall, just kind of thinking about some options, talking to some people in my network, and my phone rang, and it was a VP of a former client of Whitney Morse who said, "Hey, we left Whitney Morse a couple of weeks ago for some of the same reasons you did, and I just got out of a meeting where we learned that our CEO, our vice president of sales, and research director have all been indicted on Medicare billing fraud." It was a healthcare organization. And he says that obviously our business has the same name as the CEO's last name. So we need to rebrand the company. We have all sorts of products and services that we want to launch this year. You know our business. What are you doing right now? So sometimes opportunity knocks. Sometimes it kicks the door wide open, and that happened. So the next day, I went down and incorporated Morse code and started working with this organization, doing brand strategy work, helping them organize their portfolio of products. It was all kind of strategy work, but with a creative lens, helping them think a little bit differently to differentiate. And then a couple of other clients, I was able to follow some people who moved from different businesses to another places, and again, kind of build those relationships and start finding more clients.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. I have a tactical question about, so a situation like that arises, and okay, like, yeah, I can help for sure, but there is that business side of things that has to, you got to agree on the terms.
Mm-hmm.
And is there, I guess the root of this is how to price creativity, and when it's not a productized service, when it's kind of a large project that has a lot of different facets, and like maybe you're redesigning business cards and then also a brand and a logo. It's like, how much time do you put into a proposal of, do you make that a bundled project price, or is it an hourly rate, or how do you make that simple?
Yeah. That's a really good question. There are a few different ways to price your services. Your hourly rate, which is oftentimes landed upon by doing a competitive audit, understanding what other people in similar circles would charge, also understanding your cost structure so you can make an appropriate margin. So there's the hourly rate, there's a project fee. So you're going to charge X thousands of dollars for this project or this set of deliverables, come hell or high water, assuming you can control all the elements that go into that project. So if you spend more time on it, then you kind of take the hit. If and those project fees are also kind of what the competitive set may charge, what the set of hours you may pour into it, but also market value. So if I'm creating a logo, the old story for the Nike logo, the woman who created the swoosh, I think she was paid. Phil Knight calls this out in this awesome book, Shoe Dog. I think he paid her like $600 for this logo that ends up becoming a driving visual force for one of the world's most valued and admired brands. He has since corrected that and given her, I think, equity or shares of the business. So she's
Right.
being rewarded for it, certainly.
Nice.
But there's this market value. A logo is worth ultimately more than what you would charge for an hourly rate for creating it.
Right.
But those rates are only as valid as a customer willing to pay for it.
Exactly.
So you have to kind of do your discussions, and you get to those places by having thoughtful pre-sale discussions. I would never tell somebody, if someone comes to me and says, so how much for a video? If I want to do like a 2-minute video, I can't tell you that because there are a lot of questions I need to answer first, right? It's like somebody saying, how much is a house? Well, is it a 2-story? Does it have 3 or 2-car garage? Where is it? How many bedrooms? Stucco, pool, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of questions. So you need to figure out and answer all those questions to land on the right fee. And then the last way to price projects is through performance. If this works, we will pay you X. And as one of my mentors told me earlier in my early Morse code days, we were considering presenting a budget on performance, and it was about sales, generating sales. And he said, okay, so you're going to generate sales. Are you hiring the sales force? No, I'm not hiring the client's sales force. Okay, are you going to train the sales force on the methodology to sell that product? No, I'm not going to do that. Why? He goes, well, if you're not hiring the sales force, you have no idea who's going to sell it. You have no idea how they're going to sell it. You have no idea what the messaging is that they're going to. Why would you agree to improving sales? Well, you can improve leads, perhaps, get more people to the door, but you have nothing to do with selling that product. So performance-based pricing has to be right-sized to what you're really delivering and how you can be measured, what the performance of that is. Does that make sense?
It does. What has worked for you?
So we have, over time, we have landed on, and Morse Code was built as a project-built agency. And sometimes a project is made up of 20 projects. It's like, we want to launch this product. And that includes a campaign that may have these 3 to 30 assets that we would create and deliver through a media plan. It includes a media plan. It would include video assets and photo and all that stuff. So you put all that stuff together, and that's a really big project.
Gotcha.
So
Cool.
made up of a bunch of micro projects.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. That's a little bit easier to structure and organize.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, like we talked about earlier, sometimes you have all these projects that if you're going to get all this work, it affords you the opportunity to discount a little bit in some areas and make it even more attractive to a client.
I am curious about, I guess, with the money thing, but it's not really about money. It's about overhead and handling stress. And like, people think, at least historically, it's like more employees is a bigger business. That means you're more successful, but that's just more mouths to feed. And, like, how have you thought about growth? And if you were to do it over again, would you do everything the same, or would you make changes?
Yeah. I've realized, and probably after about 5 years of running a business that for me, the number one thing in my business was about people. It wasn't about profits, and it wasn't about necessarily even capabilities. So I tried to live and lead by example. And for me, most important thing in my world is my faith and my family. And I knew that coming out of the agency business, which is known for putting people through the grinder. I mean, 80-hour work weeks, and you're paid a bag of peanuts at the end of the week. That's not what I wanted. I wanted to create a lifestyle business for my team. So when I've got 2 boys now, 26 and 24, when they were little, I was coaching everything from baseball, football, basketball. So I would shoot out of the agency at 3:30, hair on fire, trying to get to a practice in the middle of the week. And then I would come back. I'd circle around later that night and work and finish other things. But that was important for me to demonstrate to my team. Everyone in my team knew the most important thing in my life was my family. And they also knew that I wanted the most important thing in their life to not be Morse code, to be their family. Because when you walk in the door in the morning, I want you fired up, ready to go. And if you are not balanced, and if you're pushing burnout, you're not going to bring it. And we have a work hard, play hard environment that served us really well. So focusing on people then solves a lot of problems long term. That's why we built an agency that has a really fun work environment. We have pretty cool, swanky offices, so people want to come in and work here. At least pre-COVID, it's shifted a little bit now after COVID, but for years and years, the vibe has been, let's make it kind of magical when you're here. And I've learned when you pour into people, you can ask, they'll pour back into you if they're connected to the business. So we've gone through some lean times over the years, and we had some really, really great times. And during those lean times, people are willing to kind of pull up the bootstraps and, okay, I understand. I know we can get through this collectively, and I'm willing to sacrifice this or this so we can get to the other side. And that's been pretty influential in how I have led the business over the years.
That's awesome. I love hearing that. Has there been sacrifices that you had to make to lead the business that way?
Yeah, 100%. I've told some of my closest friends and advisors that, at its heyday, Morse code was, in the 50-ish headcount size. And I'm convinced we could have been 200 people had we had a slightly different mentality or culture. So I think that's a sacrifice from the world perspective of business success. From my personal perspective of business success, I wouldn't trade a moment of it, because I know what this place meant to my team who worked here. When we sold into Gravity a couple of years ago, and I shared that news to some of the leadership team, the responses that they gave me at that time substantiated that claim about how meaningful this place was to them. Some people broke down in tears, just fearful that this is the end of this place that has meant so much to me in my life and supported my family. And so making sure that when you see people react that way, you've done it. You know that the outcome is aligned to your intent, which is super meaningful.
Getting a little emotional just hearing that.
Yeah,
I could see that.
Don't get me started.
Be a grieving process.
Yeah.
If you feel comfortable, I'd be curious about your faith and how it's shown up in the business and in work. Because with culture and advertising, some people would say that they're almost like, sometimes they're at odds.
Yeah.
And sex sells,
Yep.
and depending on the faith, I think most faiths are like, be careful what you're promoting here.
Yeah.
So how has it been being in the advertising marketing space while still being a man of faith?
Yeah. Happy to talk about it. I am a Jesus Jesus freak, as the old song goes, Christian, and I think the biggest contribution that has made to my existence as a business owner is this genuine positivity. I am known for being a super positive leader. Probably, I think a lot of entrepreneurs are, but I think you could probably put some fuel on my flame of positivity because of my faith. I believe genuinely that I don't need to worry or concern myself overly with the pressures of the world and the business, because I know how the game ends. When the game is all over, I know what's happening, and I take a lot of hope in that. You're 100% right in that it is a really difficult thing to manage, more so today than ever, as the world has become much more divisive around a multitude of topics, including religion and traditional kinds of values, as well as contemporary messaging, etc. Brands embrace that, businesses embrace that on both sides. So one thing I've learned to not sacrifice things that will really impact our culture. And there had been times over the years where we may have an opportunity to work with a brand that is in a space that we're not comfortable with. And there are not that many spaces that we feel we can't do good in. The intent is to always do good or do better in a multitude of ways for those clients. There have been opportunities in meetings I sat in where our creative team comes up with this idea, and one of those directions is just more risque or different than where I would take it. And we've pulled back on that. And I think we've lost business for it over the years. We've said no to business over the years that just we don't align with a leader and their point of view on things, or and that's okay. And we have been rewarded for that. And we've also had opportunities to bring people in. I've never wanted the culture to be filled with people who are 100% like me or like our values. We have to have some people in that challenge it. And there's a little, because that's where I can demonstrate my leadership characters to somebody who's not all in on everything I believe in, or I'm not all in on everything they believe in. At the end of the day, it's about being able to just communicate and hang out and appreciate each other. That's all I ever want to try and do for somebody. I'm not here to judge anybody, and I don't want anyone here to judge me for what I believe. I want to talk about it, and I want you to see what I believe in by how I act, not necessarily what I say per se. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Wow, that's really cool. I'm always interested in learning that because I'm a man of faith as well. I'm a Jesus guy.
Cool.
And yeah, it just seems like it can sometimes be hard to navigate.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
I do have, okay, I'm going to take a pause here. I want to make an intentional next question. Something about creativity.
Can I just add one more thing? You may want to cut it in later. You may not want to.
Yeah, 100%.
Regarding faith, I think one of the key discoveries I've made over the years is eventually landing on the belief that it doesn't matter what the world thinks. It's what your faith thinks or what God thinks in my purview. I think for so many years, you get so locked into what is my colleague going to think? What's the award committee going to think? What's my client going to think? And I think if you live it right and you balance your career and your work life correctly, with a little higher vision in mind, and measuring from that vision as opposed to the world vision, then I think you set yourself up for long-term fulfillment and success.
Yeah. I always think about the visual of one day all my works are gonna be fire tested.
Yeah.
It's like, even with work, am I producing something? Is this a video that is gonna help somebody more so than just sell some units? It's like, will this make somebody change their perspective or bring a little joy or whatever? You can always infuse something that'll bring value, even if it's not. So as far as the creative process, and this maybe ties into coming up with ideas, sometimes you can, a couple just fragmented thoughts here that I'm curious how they could all be pulled together. But one is, when I see creative work, it's usually an instinctual consumption, whereas the person that creates it sometimes spends so long and overthinking so many details.
Yeah.
And I've wondered how that balance is, and how you guys have managed to make really great art when sometimes simpler and more instinctual is better and you don't even know why it is. Or is it like the fine tuning of all the details? And I don't know how to put a point on this question other than, how have you guys navigated that, as well as having multiple voices and not letting too many cooks, ruin the soup?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a hard one, I think, especially when you're making creative product for somebody else who's buying it. They're buying your opinion on what you're going to make is going to be good for my business or my brand or my product. And I'm hiring you because I don't know how to do it myself, right? I'm not a designer. I'm not a videographer. I'm not a songwriter, or whatever it is you're hiring somebody to do for you. So I think the first step around creating something that is meaningful is getting the story and the attributes and the messaging right. What is it you want this thing to do? What do you want? What's the outcome, desired outcome? And sometimes that in and of itself is hard to either quantify or describe. And I have worked with our teams to help clients understand how to ask for that. When it comes to creativity itself, we always try and start in bite-sized pieces. So we'll start with an idea or a concept, and then we'll talk to a client about that. And sometimes clients will say, oh my gosh, that's the home run ball, is when a client says, oh, I never would have thought of that. And that's why that's the value that you can bring, is bringing ideas they never would have thought of. That's why they hire you. And then when they see that idea, then it becomes, okay, how are we going to make it? And if the idea is to put, to shoot something this way or design something that way, I need to see more information about it. So I like this idea. Then we start to show, okay, here's one way to execute that idea. If we used color or textures as the device to tell that, share that idea. Otherwise, here's another idea. And instead of using color and texture, we're going to use a word of mouth or an influencer to do that. So you can show them a couple different ideas on how we're going to create that. And after they buy in on that, then you give them a little bit more. So remember that little piece, that texture piece that I shared in that last presentation? It was supposed to be a concrete like rough image, or rough texture. But as we got into it, we found this, and I think it means even more because of what you said about that. So you can show them along the way of how you build something. And then there's always that moment of trust that you're asking a client to embark upon. They don't know what they don't know or haven't seen. You may see it in your head, and you need to transfer that into actual art or a deliverable. And sometimes a client can't get it or doesn't understand why. So there's a moment of trust where they just have to say, okay, well, you're the expert, so I'll trust you on this.
Oh. Are there any projects that are like you showcase the highlights, some with Morse code that you're the most proud of? Any that come to mind?
I tell this story a couple of times, and I end up calling it the Squirrel Project, and for two reasons. Because it was really small, it's kind of like an acorn, but it was for a really big fish client, and it actually involved the Squirrel Project. Normally, in our world, we want to come up with the idea, the strategy, and create something amazing for a business. And sometimes we, as entrepreneurs or business owners, get really impatient. We want to get the home run pitch right away. But sometimes just getting on base and laying down a bunt to get on base, that's what's required. So we had an opportunity to work with, we had been trying to crack into United Healthcare, which is a huge healthcare business in Minnesota. And they spend lots of money with lots of outside vendors. And we had finally I had finally gotten a meeting with one of their executives who we kind of hit it off in this coffee meeting. And I could tell he was trying to find a way for us to work together. He didn't have anything really big at the moment. And said, I have a sales meeting coming up next week, and I'm trying to get a little logo design. I'm thinking of this. I've been telling the sales team that every prospect that they have is like an acorn. So I'd like to have a squirrel holding this acorn. And I'm thinking, seriously, this is what you want us to do? How am I going to take this back to my design team and get them excited about this, right? So, and he goes, I don't have much money. It's I don't know, I can pay you $3,000 for it or something like that. So it's a low budget project with zero creativity, and it's a prescribed, just make this for me. And from a creative assignment, I don't think there's a creative on earth who would get jazzed up about doing that, right? So, but I took the project because it wasn't about the Squirrel Project. It was about getting into the organization, because I knew that if they were going to hire me and United Healthcare was going to cut a check for me, that's going to have to come through their procurement team, which means I have to become approved. We, Morsekode, have to become approved as a vendor. That in and of itself is worth a heck of a lot more than $3,000, because then that's the hunting license. We can start selling to all the marketers in United Healthcare. And about, I don't know, 10-ish years later, and over $10 million worth of business, that $3 million or that $3,000 little logo, that's an acorn project that grows into a mighty oak over years and years. So I guess the moral of that is, has led to a mentality and a mindset that set course for the business. Not every project is an acorn project. Some acorns die and they don't grow into a mighty oak. So I think it just takes a little bit of art and science to figure out, is this really an acorn one, or is this something we should run and hide from?
Yeah. Yeah. Some people will pitch it. They'll be like, oh, it's going to be great exposure.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I've heard that a few times.
Yeah.
Exposure doesn't pay the rent,
Right.
Danny.
Oh, man. Let's wrap this up. Just maybe one or two more questions.
Yeah. Sounds great.
I do want to just talk, well, relationships and selling. You've mentioned it internally. You've mentioned a couple stories externally. Is there anything that you've done? I mean, relationships are kind of like the point of life, and whether it's personal or professional, would you have any practices or like what would be a system is a little bit too much of a structured word, but how would you intentionally develop relationships with your customers and continue to grow that aspect of the business?
Yeah. It's evolved over the years. When I first started Morse Code, I was the guy, right? The name's on the door, you're the one where the buck stops. You're the one kind of driving direction for teams. So your relationship to a client is, it's not only functional, but it's accountability. It's based on trust. You have to have a lot of humility at times. If what you've created for a client isn't meeting their expectation, then you have to go solve that. Sometimes that expectation is shifting your team a little bit, and that can have repercussions inside the business. And And then over time, as you hire people, I've tried to be fairly astute at finding that time where, okay, now I've hired somebody who does that function much better than I do. So I think if you build your business right, that's what you need to have your eyes set on. One thing I've learned that I have been good at over the years is selling the business and the service and the team, because I've helped build the culture, and I believe in everybody here. Even now as Gravity, I believe in this culture and the team across the country. So I can go build those relationships with clients based on our new teams. But as you start to sunset some of your responsibilities in the business, your relationship with that client changes a little bit. So you may not be able to talk about all the details on these little project, but you can still talk about what's important to them from the business interaction. What I've also discovered over the years is to widen that relationship with your customer, so it's not just about business. And I've tried to preach, as I've learned this, to my account team that, why is this client not responding to our email? Well, do you know that email is about 1% of 1% of the stuff that they're worried about today? And the 80% of that stuff is probably not related to what they're going through at work. It might be something related to a family thing they're dealing with, or a bigger thing that's much bigger than the email. So just give it time. So I understood how to build relationships with people outside of just work, and understanding where work is within their life's sphere. I think that's a really important distinction. So if this executive lives for work, then I can build my relationship with him or her accordingly. But if work is a means to an end, then I can build it differently with them. And there's opportunities to be 360 degrees supportive of that person, as opposed to just business supportive. And I think that's really built a lot of great friendships I've had with clients, as well as with vendors and partners over the years.
Nice. Well, two last questions. One is, I know you've had an exit, and we don't have to talk all about the exit, but what's getting you excited now as you're entering a new season? Like, what's the vision? How do you envision moving forward?
Yeah. When I was considering selling Morse code, there were three things I was looking for in a potential buyer. It had to be an additive sale, meaning they wouldn't come in and have all the exact same services that our team has and then lay off half of our staff. So it had to be an additive, and this has been, being the first U.S. acquisition in Gravity's venture. I wanted to make sure there was opportunity for my leaders. I could sense that with most of them, there was an interest to step onto a little bit bigger stage. And they have been here at Morse Code for a while, and now at Gravity have had opportunities to work on a more global business with a national team as opposed to a regional team. So that's been really, really fun to see. And also for me as a leader to help guide them and navigate them through those waters, which is different than a regional Minneapolis-based agency. And then the last tenet was something interesting for me. I've got runway left. I don't know if I'll ever retire. I'm 57, so I certainly plan to work for a while. And there's some areas that I'm interested in. One, helping Gravity with this integration has been really fun. There's some things I'd love to continue doing with them and will for the next couple of years, but it's also freed up some of my time to consider other things. I enjoy teaching. There's a course at the University of Minnesota, capstone course I teach in their Hubbard School of Journalism. I do some speaking. I do some coaching for some people. So it's fun to just widen the aperture, some things that I haven't necessarily been able to do as someone who's been neck deep in the business that they own.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's awesome.
Yeah. And it's Minnesota, so fishing in the summer, that's starting to take up more and more time.
Nice. Last question. What's something that you'd want to leave the audience with, whether it's an ask or just a word of wisdom? Just anything that I haven't asked that you want to share?
I guess I would say that there are a few things that I've found to drive success in my career, and I've tipped into those earlier in our conversation. So, understanding what the big picture is, and for me, it's been built around my faith and understanding life as a whole, and understanding where the business fits within that. The business is part of my life; it's not my life. And I've tapped into lots of those other venues in my life to fuel the business, and then vice versa. Coaching my kids, playing in bands, writing music, having friends, being part of a small group or a church group or something. All those things kind of fuel my existence. And I think if you put everything into one basket, then you run the risk of that being your sole identity. So when I sold Morse Code, it was hard for me because I'm connected to the brand, but at the same time, I don't feel like my identity is 100% gone because Morse Code is going away. I've built up the rest of my existence around attributes outside of the business. And then I'd say celebrate your successes, and change how you measure success so you can celebrate more often. Sometimes we would celebrate a big win. We got 3 words in our culture that kind of evolved over time: was push, drive, and celebrate. So we're going to push each other to be as good as we possibly can. We're going to push clients to do great work, and pushing requires drive. You have to want to learn and improve and sharpen the sword and get better all the time. And then we're going to celebrate big, small, and micro things along the way. Hey, that client finally responded to an email. Great, let's go have a coffee. That's exciting, right? Or we won this thing, we won this award. So looking to celebrate in big and small events, because there are plenty of negative things that you have to dodge as the business throws your way. So push, drive, and celebrate's been a really good mantra for us too.
Awesome. Mark, thank you so much. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely, Danny. Great to meet you and be with you today.
That was amazing.